Without a doubt, the death of a beautiful woman is, unquestionably, the most poetic topic in the world, as the great writer Edgar Allan Poe once said. We often compare even in death. The death of a young person is usually more tragic than an old one, isn't it? Because they had an entire life yet to live. And what could be more tragic than a death that is not only young and beautiful, but also completely unjust? Our story today will revolve around such a figure, Lady Jane Grey, England's forgotten queen. A girl just 17 years old, pushed onto a throne she never craved, only to hold the crown for a mere 9 days. She was the first woman proclaimed Queen of England, yet the name Queen Jane is almost unheard of. So ask yourself, did this girl truly deserve better? Join me as we uncover her story. Lady Jane Grey was born in the 16th century into a noble family with high Tudor blood, being the great-granddaughter of King Henry VII. From an early age, Jane was given an outstanding education and quickly showed superior intellect and an unquenchable thirst for learning. She was not only a talented linguist, but also passionate about philosophy and theology. But don't be quick to think Jane had a peaceful, pampered childhood. This is precisely the pain point rarely mentioned by history. Behind the facade of a refined young lady, Jane endured tremendous pressure from her own parents. She once uttered bitter words that many of our audience, who sometimes feel helpless against societal expectations, will surely empathize with. When I am in the presence of my parents, every action, word, gesture of mine, whether sitting, standing, eating, joyful, sad, playing or dancing, must be meticulously weighed and measured, so precisely that everything must be as perfect as when God created the world. Otherwise, I will be mocked bitterly, cruelly threatened, even forced to endure things that self-respect itself does not allow me to speak of. That makes me feel like I am in hell. Imagine a talented young girl craving knowledge, yet treated like a machine, a robot forced to obey every rule to achieve perfection. This makes us, who are always looking for the truth behind the curtain and dislike dry facts, wonder, did the brutal pressures from her family shape Jane's later resolute yet tragic character? And did it push her into a spiral of destiny that no young woman deserved to endure? The political landscape of 16th century England was seething. King Edward VI, a zealous Protestant, was dying of tuberculosis. Knowing he didn't have long to live, he desperately wanted his successor to also be a Protestant, to protect the Reformation from the threat of Catholicism. But the legitimate heir was his half-sister Mary, a steadfast Catholic. Meanwhile, a powerful and ambitious figure emerged, Duke John Dudley, Jane's future father-in-law. As Edward VI's chief advisor and the dominant figure at court, Dudley skillfully manipulated the dying young king. He exploited Edward's fears about the future of Protestantism to persuade the king to change the line of succession. Dudley argued, Jane is also a Protestant. If your Majesty grants the inheritance to Jane instead of Mary, you can ensure the continuation of Protestantism. Only a short time after that shocking proclamation, Edward died, and Lady Jane Grey, unintentionally, officially became Queen of England. It was a conspiracy meticulously orchestrated by John Dudley to seize power, using Jane's Tudor blood to achieve his goals. The popular view still describes Jane as an innocent victim, a pitiful pawn exploited in a brutal power struggle, a girl who ascended the throne unintentionally. But is that the whole truth? Another perspective that is rarely discussed, revealed through historical documents, shows that Jane was not entirely passive as we might think. On the contrary, she took decisive actions to assert her power upon ascending the throne. She personally took charge of the keys to the Tower of London and even imprisoned members of the Privy Council, those who intended to abandon her. This was a decisive move, showing that Jane was not entirely a puppet, but that she tried to take control of her own destiny. So this opens up a profound debate. Was Jane truly as innocent as history often portrays her, or did she actively participate in this risky game of power, even if only in a small way, in an effort to survive and assert herself? The truth behind it is far more complex than we imagine. On July 10, 1553, Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed Queen of England in a swift coronation ceremony. But the joy of the new reign lasted less than a week. When the news reached Mary Tudor, she did not waver. Mary acted quickly, proclaiming herself the legitimate queen and gathering forces at Framlingham Castle in East Anglia. A strong tide of support began to pour in for Mary, indicating that the English people believed in hereditary succession more than a manipulated will. Jane's power began to unravel rapidly. Jane's navy, originally dispatched to intercept Mary, mutinied and delivered their weapons to Mary. This was a major coup, as these ships were supposed to represent Jane's government. Within the Tower of London, where Jane was hiding, members of the Privy Council gradually abandoned her, even secretly leaving the tower, one by one like collapsing dominoes. They realized that the general mood of the kingdom was leaning towards Mary. Even Jane's own uncle, the Earl of Arundel, deserted her. And then the dramatic, tragic climax arrived. On July 18th, just 8 days after ascending the throne, Jane was left in the Tower of London, her fortress of power, now her prison. Her father, Henry Grey, entered the room, gently removing the royal cloak from Jane's head, a clear symbol that her reign had ended. Jane, without anger or tears, accepted the news calmly. She said, "I did not choose to take the crown. Now I will abandon it as willingly as I accepted it." And then an innocent, heartbreaking question echoed, "Can I go home now?" This reaction not only shows the sudden transition from a queen to a prisoner, but also reveals the weariness and incredible innocence of a young girl forced to bear a role that did not belong to her. The disintegration of power also clearly reflected that even if the law declared Jane the legitimate successor, the people did not accept her as their queen. From that moment, Jane Grey's fate was sealed. After her ascension, Queen Mary I, despite being harsh with conspirators like John Dudley, who was publicly executed, initially showed surprising leniency towards Jane and her husband, Guildford Dudley. Instead of immediate execution, Mary only imprisoned them in the Tower of London. Perhaps Mary, a family member, saw the youth and manipulation of this young couple. She wanted to show clemency to unite the kingdom and build support from the elite. This is a highlight in the viral story about Jane Grey, making the audience extremely curious and empathetic. Although given a chance to live, Jane resolutely refused to change her Protestant faith to Catholicism, something Mary deeply desired. Jane was not a coward. She was a teenage religious thinker, ready to face death for her ideals. The clearest manifestation of Jane's unwavering faith was the powerful letter she wrote to her former tutor, who had converted to Catholicism. In that letter, Jane did not hesitate to condemn Catholicism as a cannibalistic form of Satan's devil and called on everyone to resist. This letter sparked intense controversy because it violated all social norms of the time. A young girl used extremely strong language to criticize an older man, her former teacher, and even used inappropriate language. The opposing view argues that Jane's steadfastness in faith, though noble, was also a key factor that prevented Mary from fully pardoning her. Even though Mary overlooked that audacious letter and did not sign the execution order immediately, Jane still remained imprisoned with no hope of freedom. This raises a deep, thought-provoking question, an aha moment about the nature of belief. Was faith a burden or a strength for Jane? Was remaining steadfast in her faith until the end the right choice for her? Or was it also the factor that sealed the tragic fate of an innocent young woman? Just when it seemed Jane might be pardoned, fate pushed her into another brutal turn. Queen Mary had announced her intention to marry Philip II of Spain. This decision caused great anxiety among the English people, as Philip was both Catholic and foreign. Fears of Catholic influence and dependence on Spain surged powerfully. In January 1554, just months after Jane's imprisonment, Thomas Wyatt launched a rebellion in London to overthrow Mary. The decisive factor that sealed Jane's fate was that her father, Henry Grey, participated in this rebellion. Although it is unclear whether Jane knew about her father's conspiracy, his actions directly linked her fate to the disastrously failed rebellion. Wyatt's rebellion was quickly suppressed, leading to hundreds of brutal executions. Although Mary had pardoned Jane's father once before for the plot to put Jane on the throne, this time she could not forgive again. The painful and ironic truth is, when Jane refused to let her father lead troops to confront Mary at Framlingham earlier, She might have saved her father's life. But it was her father's later actions in Wyatt's rebellion that sealed Jane's destiny, because as long as Jane lived, she would always be a symbol, a rallying point for Protestant rebels against Mary. Mary understood she could not let Jane live. Ultimately, Mary, albeit reluctantly, signed the death warrant for Jane and her husband, Guildford Dudley. And for Jane's father, perhaps this was the most terrible punishment. He had to live long enough to know his daughter had been executed. This raises a haunting debate. Was Jane's fate truly determined by her own actions or entirely by those around her? Who is ultimately responsible for the tragic death of a talented young girl trapped in a political maelstrom? The death warrant was signed. Jane and her husband, Guildford Dudley, would be executed within 5 days. Guildford Dudley was publicly executed at Tower Hill, where the public witnessed the crimes of traitors. But for Jane, she was among the very few executed privately inside the Tower Fortress. This reflected her special status, a queen if only for a moment, and one of only 3 queens executed there, along with Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. On February 12, 1554, Jane, only 17 years old, walked out to the scaffold. She wore an all-black dress, holding a prayer book. According to the most reliable account from the Chronicle of Queen Jane, written by an eyewitness, Jane was not at all distraught nor afraid of her own death, nor did she flinch when she saw the body of her husband, who had been executed earlier. She was calm, though her 2 loyal maids, Mistress Elizabeth Tilney and Mistress Ellen, wept profusely. Let's look at the masterpiece painting The Execution of Lady Jane Grey by Paul Delaroche. This painting truly and hauntingly depicts Jane's final moment, immersing the viewer in an intense emotional experience, a core image. Jane is blindfolded, her small hands trembling as they search for the block, contrasting sharply with the large, steady hand of her helper. This detail not only emphasizes the youth and innocence of the 17-year-old girl, but also evokes the helplessness of a victim. The wedding ring, a shimmering gleam on Jane's finger, is her wedding ring, recalling her tragic marriage to Guildford, whom she refused to meet one last time, believing they would meet again in another place, bound by indissoluble ties. She then had to witness her husband's headless body being brought back to the tower. Color and metaphor. Delaroche depicted Jane as an innocent angel with smooth white skin and a pure white dress. This purity completely contrasts with the dark tones and blood-red color of the executioner, who represents the darkness and sin of the era. The reluctance of the executioners. A special and deeply humane aspect of the painting is the reluctant, even distressed faces of the executioner and his assistant. They also did not want to carry out this terrible task. This image is supported by historical documents showing that Jane forgave the executioner and only asked him to do his work quickly. The contrast between the typically cold demeanor of executioners and the weakness and reluctance in the painting makes the viewer feel agonizing empathy. In that final moment, as Jane laid her head on the block, she spoke her last meaningful words, also the last words of Jesus on the cross: "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Then the sharp axe descended, ending the life of a tragically young girl. Jane's death transformed her into a symbol, a Protestant martyr. Although her image was erased from historical documents, and not even a single authentic portrait of her remains, the story of Jane's tragic death endures, haunting human minds for centuries. So was Lady Jane Grey truly a forgotten queen, or is she an eternal symbol of resilience and the tragedy of power? A mirror reminding us of the horrific costs of a life filled with inescapable destinies. And did this young girl truly deserve better?